Hi, hello, and welcome to this episode of Geography Girl. Today I will be finally continuing with our political theory in place series. Last time we covered the incredibly interesting legacy of fascist architecture in Italy. We saw everything from classical Roman-inspired architecture to the weirdly sexualized, robotic, sleek urgency of futurism. And today we're going to be looking at the architecture of Nazi Germany, because architecture was central to the Nazi project. It was, by some accounts, Hitler's one true passion. According to his chief architect, Albert Speer, he would regularly exclaim how much he would love to be an architect. Architecture was yet another vehicle for Hitler to exert his power in 1933. As early as his ramblings in Mein Kampf in 1925, he was planning a programme of architectural works which came to life in 1936. His dream was to build the largest monument ever created. The legacy of the Third Reich would be in its culture, physical buildings, monuments, and environment. And none of this could be achieved without his right-hand man, Albert Speer. Speer was one of Hitler's right-hand men and idolised the Führer. He took to his campaign to build buildings that would last for 1,000 years with great enthusiasm. Apparently, through many intimate meetings, they spoke about ancient empires, agreeing that empires still expressed their power even as their buildings lay in ruins, hoping that if and when the empire fell, the buildings of the Third Reich would have the same impressive legacy. Working under the motto, always the biggest, the duo obsessed over surpassing the scale of buildings of former empires. Speer reported that he could find Hitler's excitement rising whenever I could show him that, at least in size, we had beaten the other great buildings of history. Hitler, in return, expressed a quasi-religious devotion for Speer, whom he admired as the most brilliant architect who ever lived. As an aide to Hitler once told Speer, "Do you know who you are? You are Hitler's unrequited love." Whether or not Speer's buildings were tools of oppression, or if architecture is fundamentally apolitical, is still debated by some, but I find this hard to agree with. Speer was named the Minister of Armaments and Ammunitions and used millions of forced labourers to raise economic production. For his part to play, he went to prison for 20 years and was charged with war crimes at the Nuremberg trials, but claims in his book that he didn't know of the atrocities happening in labour camps. I highly doubt it. Nazi architecture was less weaponized in a militaristic sense, but as an apparatus of effective capture designed to create an atmosphere that creates not fully conscious pressures on the body. Speer stressed the theatrical and technical aspects of his work. He said he was most proud of his work on the Party Congress grounds at Nuremberg. The rally grounds were constructed with 130 spotlights pointed to the sky. There were bright flags by day and searchlights by night, creating dramatic vertical columns known as the Cathedral of Light. It was designed to eliminate the barriers between classes and unite the masses. Light was a tool used in German architecture to stimulate emotions, so that the audience would be more likely to succumb to German ideology. In his memoir, Speer wrote that this cathedral was his most beautiful architectural concept. British Ambassador Henderson commented that the effect was both solemn and beautiful. It was like being in a cathedral of ice. Like so many, we've seen this in the UK, the US and Italy, much of the architecture was inspired by the Greeks. Speer was in particular influenced by the Doric order, meaning minimal decorations and straight lines, reinforcing ideas of order and discipline. These eternal colossal buildings were designed to demonstrate the Nazis' eternal glory and reinforcing its stability in contrast with the previous Weimar government. Speer was described as one of the most famous architects of the 20th century and one who understood that classical architecture had been the noblest instrument of political and civilizing propaganda for thousands of years and throughout all great cultures and continents. Here are some of the features of neoclassical architecture that we can find. Physical, a use of granite like big impressive buildings that communicate the eternal glory. Long porticos and columned balconies. High columns and square sections. Absolute simplicity without decorations and ornaments. And wide staircases. Functional, spatially arranged along longitudinal axis. a use of geometry and symmetry, and the prominence of entrance space. And symbolic. There was a direct symbolism in facade, in the eagle sculptures and broken cross, which were usually found in Nazi buildings. Indirect symbolism with broken crosses decorated under roofs. High heights with high volume to intimidate the individual against the ideology, and contrasting light and shadow, with long and elevated corridors. Germania. Hitler's building plans were planned in tandem with his eventual aims, which were to rule the world. Hitler's plan was to make Berlin the central point of the world. Hitler was keen on renaming Berlin to Germania. The name Germania would give every member of the German community a feeling of unity and closer membership. Hitler believed that his greatest legacy would be found in its public buildings. Hitler was not a fan of Berlin. He found it disorderly and mundane. He, like many others, admitted his admiration for the grand Parisian boulevards and the circular grandness of Vienna's Ringstrasse. The plans for Germania were huge. It was to essentially become Hitler's stage. There was two axes, a 7-kilometre north to south avenue, intersecting with an east to west axis. These were to be lined with government buildings, theatres, shops, railways, Hitler's palace, the Reichstag. Designer Speer was granted authority to remove anything in its way. It was all about the Platz. The station to the south was to have a forecourt of 1,000 by 300 metres, decorated, rather obscurely, by captured foreign weapons. It was about exerting control over the physical landscape as well as its people. His Berlin would replace the bustle of people with a regimented order of marching men and cheering orders. Speer said, "For the commission to do a great building, I would have sold my soul like a Faust." He sold the souls of others too. 130,000 prisoners of war were put to construction sites for Germania, with tens of thousands dying in the process. The Great Arch. The Great Arch was to celebrate Germany's triumph over all other in the Second World War. Like many fascist ideologies, the Nazis focused on the tale of the martyr, and as such, this Roman-style arch, 2.5 times higher than the Arc de Triomphe, was to be inscribed with the names of 1.8 million Germans who lost their lives in the First World War. All that is to show for it is a massive pillar rising 4 stories and drilling down 18 metres into the ground. This pillar was a heavy load structure, as Berlin was built on swampy ground and was built to simulate one of the 4 pillars that would have held up the 120-metre tall Triumphal Arch. It was built in 1941, costing around 1.7 million euros in today's money on the backs of forced labour of French prisoners of war. The Great Hall. The Great Hall is about as megalomaniac as it gets. It was to be the crowning jewel of Germania, 17 times higher than that of St. Peter's in Rome. It was to become a church, a place of worship for the Führer and to the Reich, and to accommodate 180,000 people. At the top stood a dome, 300 metres in the air, with an eagle clutching a globe. According to Speer, Hitler was obsessed with the gigantic dome and was deeply riled when the Soviets began constructing an even bigger palace of the Soviets. The Grand Hall was designed where Hitler would be the central focus of the hall. It was theatric, dramatic, and the culmination of the cult of Hitler. It was to be connected by a great arch, by long avenues and buildings for businesses and civic use, long enough for parades of marching troops, and to include Nazi statues, new roads, and autobahns. Architects and urban planners have analysed the city in recent years and claimed it would have been a nightmare to live in. Speer did not believe in traffic lights or trams, and it would have been nightmarish for pedestrians who would have had to have gone underground across the streets. Tempelhof Airport. Tempelhof Airport is these days used for events, but served as an expression of Nazi ideology as a weapons production site. The site has always been associated with aviation. In 1887, it was the site of the Prussian Army's balloon detachment. Construction for Tempelhof began between 1923 and 29, as it was not able to keep up with the needs with the nation. By 1934, the Nationalist Socialists were securely in place, and Hitler began his makeover. The building complex consists of a number of structures, as well as being an airport that was also a concentration camp, using forced labour for arms production during the Second World War. Tempelhof Airport is a contrasting mix of monumentality and modernism. It was designed by Ernest Segerbal, who used indirect symbolism, an eagle with open wings in the plan. There are long corridors, entrance ridges, heavy arches around the building, and the use of symmetry in the facade and the plan. The facades that face the capital are decorated with shell limestone, but from the airfield you can see an imposing structure of pure steel. Grand and imposing, the building was consciously repressed, not exempt from the principles of new objectivity, which was a movement in the 1920s and the 30s to bring simplicity and functionality to architecture. Indoors, in contrast, the reception hall was large, with wall pillars, marble flooring and sculpture. Legacy. Much of the plans for Germania were never completed due to the outbreak of war. Following the war, the city underwent denazification, the removal of relics. Where many just wanted to erase and forget, it was just now possible with the shortage of usable buildings. So, marble from the new Reich Chancellery was used to build a subway, Nazi headquarters became a music academy, the Nuremberg parade grounds were used for car racing and concerts, and the Tempelhof Airport was given a makeover to resemble a friendlier German-American friendship. Influence on Iranian architecture. The rise of the Nazi Party ushered in a new era of Iran-Germany relations. It is thought that this could be due to the shared struggles with British and Russian colonial rule and the perceived superiority of the Aryan race. There began a presence of German experts, engineers and companies within Iran as Germany took over many of the country's banking and financial institutions, bringing with them neoclassical architecture in many of the state and administrative buildings in Iran. Neoclassical buildings were mainly used in the Pahlavi period, similarly to express power and gain prestige over its people. That's it for today's episode. I hope you found it interesting. Please give it a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.